All right. Welcome to Standing on the Moon, the Lyrical Imagination, our first ever event exploring the intersection between literature and songwriting, which we're very excited about, featuring the very talented Sima Cunningham in conversation with equally very talented Alan Semerdjian. I will introduce Alan, and Alan will continue introducing Sima, and we'll go through the conversation, performance, and the Q&A afterwards. Thank you for joining us again. Alan Semerdjian is an Armenian-American writer, musician, and educator. Recent recognitions include two Pushcart nominations, a Frontier New Poets Award, and Poems in Poetry International, the Brooklyn Rail, Fence, Hanging Loose, and Mizna forthcoming. He's released 3 collections of poetry and over a dozen albums of music over the past 30 years. He is the founder and director of Yala's Young Armenian Poets Awards, YAPA, and Alan also sits on our advisory board and teaches English at Herrick's High School in New Hyde Park, New York, and is also the current poet laureate of New York's Nassau County. Uh, Thank you for being with us. And I am Hovsep Markaryan, Yala's executive director. Alan, over to you.
Thank you, Hofstep. Been doing great work as the executive director, and we're thankful for setting this up. Just a little bit of context. The impetus for this event was the conversation around American songwriter Bob Dylan winning the Nobel Prize in 2016. And this is a quote from the Nobel organization for having created new poetic expressions within the great American song tradition. And there's always been this connection between songwriting and literature there. And despite, courses on Taylor Swift at Harvard and many schools around the world, examining the art of how songs are crafted lyrically and musically, the consideration of the former, lyric writing, as the latter, literature, still comes as a surprise to some. It's still a bit of a question. And in his acceptance speech for the 2016 Nobel Prize, Bob Dylan wrote that if someone had ever told me that I had the slightest chance of winning the Nobel Prize, I would have to think that I'd have about the same odds as standing on the moon. So that's where the title for this examination of the lyrical imagination comes from. So we're incredibly excited to have with us today a friend and a stellar and talented musician, Sima Cunningham, to dive into this discussion. So Sima Cunningham is a Chicago-based musician, songwriter, producer, presenter, and founding member of Chicago's art rock band Finom. Finom has been celebrated as the heart of the Chicago music community. They released 3 records, including the acclaimed LPs Parts in 2018, Fantasize Your Ghost 2020, and the most recent Not God, which is just a terrific record, 2024, with Joyful Noise recordings. The band has been featured on NPR's Tiny Desk Concert, Pitchfork, Pace, Chicago Tribune, Rolling Stone, Spin, so many other places. Her solo record, High Roller, will be released in August, I think it's August 30th, on Ruination Records. And over the past 15 years, she has worked as a recording and touring musician with Jeff Tweedy, Richard Thompson, Iron and Wine, many other artists. Not too long ago, Finom toured Japan with the Great Americana and art rock band Wilco. Sort of a dream gig for me. An Armenian-American artist and descendant of genocide survivors, she has focused much of her work on building connections and healing divides through music. And over the last 10 years, she has traveled to Armenia, Caucasus to perform, participate in workshops. She did a TEDx Yerevan, I think in 2014, and foster creative cross-cultural opportunities between artists in Armenia and the United States. Her work as an artist presenter includes founding a small music festival, Postdoc, that will celebrate its 16th year. I think it just celebrated in 2024. Curating and hosting the I Hear Voices series in Chicago at the Constellation, a great space for improvised music, and working as a lead organizer for the Pitchfork Music Festival. Welcome, Sima. Let us know where you are in the world today before we even get into questions.
Hi, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I'm in Chicago. I just got back. I was playing a show with Finom um, on the Michigan shore last night, and it was really beautiful.
awesome. Um, it's great to have you here, and I can't wait for our talk. I'm going to just dive in with the first question. I know we're going to hear a little performance from you and feature a music video. Um, but let's start with the question, like lyric and lyric writing. As an artist, as a reader of literature, as a maker of lyric writing, is lyric and lyric writing literature? And or maybe the better question is how are lyrics literature?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I feel like my feelings and thoughts about it kind of are a little amoeba like and kind of shift day to day and like, or not day to day, but just at different eras, I feel different. They're I tend to be kind of like a sort of a big. I have eras. Like I write a lot of my songs, or if I write poetry, I write it all at once. I kind of like fill up my bucket, and then it kind of all comes out. I'm not really a very like habitual writer. I don't do it every day. I kind of like the steam builds up, and then it shoots out. And I think I also feel that way about like whether I'm like, I will not read poetry for a really long time and then I'll dive into it, and then or I won't really read a novel for a long time and then I'll like read a bunch in the so but do I feel like it's literature? I think that in some ways it backtracks to literature because I do feel like that lyrics and how songs are created is such like an organic from inside the body process that is not necessarily tied to trying to say one thing or the other, if that makes sense. I feel
Mhm.
like for me, so many songs and lyrics start with the shapes and the sounds and the feelings, which are often like and then through them, it kind of reveals a story. So I feel like it sort of starts as like nonsense and just feeling, and then eventually it kind of distills itself into something that actually makes sense, whether it's like, lyrics or a story. But I feel like you have to kind of work backwards into it being literature, in my opinion. Like sometimes I listen to a song and I kind of absorb the words and maybe even subconsciously memorize the words before I even really think about what they mean or what they're saying. And then it's only after like really thoroughly digesting them that I actually think of them as words that could be comprehended. And then I think about them more as in the realm of literature. Um, but with, I don't ever like approach lyrics. Yeah, I feel like for me, it's so much about the human voice that is like coming through them. And then once you kind of like peel away some of the more human elements, then you can kind of um, take the words more on they can stand on their own or you can evaluate them on their own. Yeah.
It's an interesting window into process already, Seema. It sounds like the initial urge to make the words for you comes from almost like almost like a non-verbal place, a
Hmm.
psychological space, an emotional place. And then, if I'm getting it correct, you're saying that maybe later in revision, once it's sort of down, are you making other changes, or is it sort of first thought, best thought, and it stays there? But are you making those changes, as you said, to kind of make it into whatever literary, whatever, however we define literature later? Like, is it like almost like in the revision process, it's shaped in that way? Or is it shaped in that day because of its relationship to sound and music, right? Because the difference, you know, for me and for some other writers I spoke to, is that like the poem, like on the page is sort of like, really it's kind of it's not married to anyone, whereas the lyric is kind of has this sort of marriage and union with sound, right?
Mhm.
So poetry just kind of is married to the universe, whereas the lyrics are kind of married to you know, whatever the band or the songwriter, you know, whatever the music is. So anyway, going back to the process question, yeah, what do you think? Is it shaped later?
I think it is shaped later. I almost never set out to like intentionally write a song about a thing. I always kind of try and let the the sounds of the words and
Mm.
the meaning reveal itself. Now, that doesn't work for like a whole song. Like I can't, I don't necessarily, though sometimes I just free write a song and it just like kind of comes all out in one page. As I said, I'm a big spurt
Yeah.
writer, so sometimes it just but um I think it's so interesting now because so many of my like early evaluate, especially thinking about my early relationship with sound and songwriting and like even just my own imagination is like being revealed and colored now because I have a 1.5-year-old, and so I'm seeing her develop the ability to like form sounds and sentences, and she's like imitating, she's imitating us talking right now, so she's
Mm.
like doing a lot of like and I'm like, that's amazing because that's often like how I write songs, is that I'll like strum a chord and kind of go and I was actually thinking about this getting ready for this talk, that I think I do believe this pretty core that like uh yeah, deep inside, that I really believe that like it's all about vowels. Like
Mm.
vowels are the kind of the meat of songwriting, or they're not the meat, they're like the all the substance, all the food that you're eating, and then like consonants for me are like the texture of the food.
Mm.
But it's like ultimately the center of what you're eating and what you're listening to and what you're connecting to is the vowel that is coming out of the voice. Like I there's so many instances where you don't even like know what they're saying, but it's sort of like and they were low. Like I was thinking about it with when I was a little kid, my parents used to have me listen to Bob Marley all the time.
Mhm.
And um I was thinking about like a song like No Woman No Cry, where it's like no woman no cry. Like it's so about how those vowels move across that song that
Yeah.
is what you grab onto. So I think a lot of my songwriting starts with like melodies connected to vowels. And then from there, sometimes I'll find like a sentence that just feels so good to sing. Or it's not even a sentence, it's like a phrase, right?
Mm.
Um, like I'll find a phrase, and then I think a lot of the times I start with kind of like a first verse, and then that will inspire where the rest of the song moves. I don't know necessarily if I'll find a chorus that is like comes from that, or if the chorus ends up being like its own line of inspiration, and then I just find a way to kind of marry them together and have the song. And then through that, that's where I think some of like the writing and the creative writing happens, is like you find a couple points of lyrical inspiration
Mm.
that just feel really resonant in your voice, and then from there is where I think it gets, you have to actually do the work of like, all right, well now make this song work. Like, is it going to tell a story? Is it painting a picture? Is it actually, is the whole, is the song more, is it going to stay in the world of kind of abstract nonsense with only a couple crystalline moments that really rise up and punch people out from it, or like give people something to grab onto? um, so that's where I find like the more creative writing part is when you're filling in the song. But I do believe that it's like there's kind of sound inspiration that you have to land on first, in order for it to be a song that really resonates with people. And for this reason, I think it's really hard to collaboratively write songs. Like I'm in a band that's a two-headed. Finom is me and another woman, Macy Stewart, but we sometimes collaborate on like a section of a song, but ultimately I kind of believe that most songwriting, if it has to be explained to someone while it's in the process of writing, then it probably is going to explain away some of the magic. Like there's all these like tenuous connections that I think are made in the process of songwriting, and if you make any of them too concrete while you're still creating the song, I think it makes the song feel heavier. And I feel like a really good song should just feel light and kind of natural. You're like, I don't know why those words are the right picture there or why that phrase sits so beautifully and lightly, but it feels really magical and I want to kind of like let that be. So I kind of believe that there's like a little magic that you shouldn't overladen with like meaning too early on in the process.
It's fascinating. You're touching on a lot of things. The sound, the way you touched on the vowels early on, Sima, it's so interesting too, because you can't, I guess I suppose that, because you can't really extend a consonant, right? Like it doesn't really work the way you can extend a vowel. Like I was hearing you just sort of riff, and it would be hard to, I mean, I guess with an S, I suppose there's certain ones you can, but the vowels are, yeah, I think you're
I love extending an N
an
in
N.
song I wrote recently. I
Yeah.
love to kind of like, mm, sorry, am I breaking up?
No, I could hear you. I don't know. I think we're okay. We'll see when you
I was just saying I love to extend an N sometimes.
yeah,
Mm.
and I think that that kind of your propensity to kind of, even that what you're saying right there, to kind of go after the thing that is maybe a little bit harder to do. I think it's fascinating, and it does, going back to what you said about having writing the thing, and then is it going to be a story, or is it going to be what I interpret as like a more lyrical poem, which is what you're trying to sort of capture an emotion or something, or be less direct about like meaning. It reminds me a little bit of what the poet, I don't know if you know her work, Arda Collins, said about poetry in a Poetry Society of America, a blog. She was saying that the process of inquiry is one place where poetry comes from, and she was talking about how it's about being in a state of inquiry, and that state is sort of pleasurable, and it's an intimate and private space, she talks about it, and it's also meant to exist in a larger privacy of the invisible shared space of our psyches. So, and that psyches don't always make kind of a literal direct sense. And she goes on to say that um, the elusive turns of thought are what grays our fields into clarity. So I really want to focus on that elusive turns of thought, because I do think that your lyric writing is kind of based on that. And we're going to see in a moment, an example of that, of your work. But I just wanted to, well, maybe that's the best thing to do right now. Maybe we should jump into if
Sorry, I'm back.
oh, there you are. We
I'm
lost you for a moment.
I heard you were saying that your propensity. Can you repeat that question?
Yeah. So what I was saying is that I think you have a kind of a really interesting, Sima, a propensity to kind of dive into, and I'm going to paraphrase, kind of dive into abstraction, and to really not tell a story in a kind of a direct linear narrative way in your lyrics. Although some of them do, but I think that most of it kind of, to me, mirrors what this poet, Arda Collins, I don't know if you know her work, was talking about. And she was talking about poetry as like this process of inquiry into a place. And that place involves the psyche. And that the psyche oftentimes has this kind of intrinsic, elusive, she called it elusive turns of thought, right? And those elusive turns of thought, she says, is her words, graze our fields into clarity. And I think that kind of fascination with abstraction, I think really brings your lyrics into a kind of a modernist poetry sense for me as a listener. You know, while stories are told and while there are narratives in there, you know, to me, it's more about the experience. So I was thinking, if it's okay with you, that you can maybe pick a song and we can, as listeners, this little community here that's on the call, we can kind of listen for that and see how the lyrics, you know, how they live inside the song. And then we can ask some questions about that afterwards. And you can pick whatever song, you know, you want, and you can intro it in whatever way you want. Just let us know that we're focusing, you know, we're specifically focusing on the lyrics, but, you know, whatever we want. It could be something from the new album. It's totally up to you. Really curious.
Yeah. Should I play it? Should I play
I
that
think you
song?
should, yeah, play it. And then maybe
Okay.
just tell us if you want a little words about it ahead of time, or we'll dive into the lyrics afterwards.
Sure. I'm gonna play this song called Bully Clouds. That's a kind of a really early Finom song. Probably wrote this
Cool.
song about 8 or 9 years ago. But I feel like it's one of the songs that I'm really, yeah, I'm really proud of it. So I don't know if I want to say, I'm just gonna play it and then maybe we can talk about it after.
Great.
Okay. Can you hear the guitar?
Yep. I think we're good.
Okay. Bully clouds on the horizon carry on their shores a season, carry on their shores a demon. A little blood gives off a poison, and all the ghouls forgot their reason. Now we know the land is empty, a favor that needed providing. I've come to know a different story, one I always knew was hiding. Golden amber fills my belly, quiets all my inhibitions. So I go run up to the leader, tell her all about my visions, tell her how I saw a smile fall upon her face unkind. I said what I had thought a while, you're happier when we are dying. 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 Am I wrong? You're happier when we are dying. Happier when we are dying. Happier when we are dying. As kind of an abridged version of that song. So
Thank you so much. That was actually one that I did not prepare to hear, which is even better. It's the best. So I just want to, can we dive in for a moment on this? This is
yeah.
cool. So the leader appears, right, in the song.
Yeah.
And then the speaker starts talking about you're happier when you're dying. So psychically, I'm making
You're happier when we're dying.
when we are dying, not you're
Yeah.
dying, but right. And so I'm making that kind of psychic connection that whoever this leader is the, is some, has this kind of oppressive force that is, like again, we don't know if this is coming from like a friendship or what community or what. We don't have that established yet. I mean, maybe on many listens we might, but and maybe you've done that intentionally. But the idea is, for me, like, and you do this in other songs too, is kind of capturing the mindset of like, there's this kind of leader, there's this kind of other bigger kind of force person, and examining that in its relation to how it impacts the, whoever that person is, kind of in charge of, or what have you.
Totally.
So do you want to speak about that a little bit, about this song, or about if indeed that is like almost like a thematic thing for you?
Yeah, I do. I think you have touched on something that I do a lot in my lyric writing, which is that I like, I do kind of, first of all, I like to couch the I in inside of a world. Like, sometimes, I feel like there's always this like struggle with like I songs, right? Or like starting song, any poetry. I'm sure you also struggle in the world of poetry of like, how much do you want to, start from the I was doing this, I thought this, but like, I think that in a lot of my songs, I kind of, the who the song is about swirls around, kind of like in How a Dream, how uh like, I feel like in my dreams, at least, who is the main character changes a lot. Like, sometimes I have dreams where it's very first person. Some I have dreams where it's very much about a character that I'm looking at. And then sometimes I have dreams where I'm watching a whole world play out in front of me.
Mm.
And I feel like I try and do that in songwriting sometimes and sort of let it naturally jump in between those. But I think I also do often center my songs on like some person that is doing something to me, whether it's like I'm looking at someone. In this song Bully Clouds, I do think it is about someone who's exerting power or not, not protecting the people that they're supposed to be protecting. And i'm I'm not necessarily a character in this story. I'm more like, almost in like a literature way, evaluating this character through this song and kind of um, looking at what their intentions are, what their thought process is, what their, yeah, like what, what are their inner workings? What are my inner workings? How do they connect with each other, like in this moment of song? And then also, there's parts of the song that are trying to illustrate the world that, I think if I was gonna really like simplify what this song is about, like if I, like there's a part of it that is about colonialism. Like, I think when I first was writing about Bully Clouds, I was like literally thinking about like the Nina and Pinta, because I think the Native Americans always described like what the boats looked like coming towards them as clouds. So I think of them as these sort of like aggressive clouds moving towards a land and then kind of clearing the land of people. But
Mm.
then it kind of like shifts in the second verse to me, to not me, but to the person, the character, like yelling at trying to get the attention of leaders of like this core issue that's going on in our world. And there's also like an element of like kind of the like drinking and that kind of like drunken state where you feel like you want to like yell at all these things, but all of these layers of issue that, these issues that you take with the world get a little muddled in that state of drunkenness, and you end up kind of just with this like pool of feelings. But then it kind of clarifies to the chorus, which is, you're happier when we're all dying.
Right.
um which is, I think, kind of one of those, I think that's like one of the cool ways that humans communicate, right? Like sometimes we blabber, we blabber and we say, I don't know, I feel this, and I don't, I'm just spitballing here, right? But then after you kind of clear out all of that language that's full of emotion and not really full of direction, like, so this is why we say, I just needed to talk it out, right? Because like you're clearing all of this language, all of this feeling through your mouth. And then sometimes at the end of that, I find often at the end of that, you get to this, all right, this is what I'm trying to say. Like, people in power are happy when people that they control over are dying, or people that they're trying to dominate are dying. Um, like, I think that was like part of what that song was connecting to. Is, I don't know if it was, I think I was thinking about it in the context of Native Americans, but obviously it's like a theme that I think about a lot. I think about, there's, I mean, I think obviously I've grown up with the idea of genocide and how does genocide happen, and part of it is that there are there are people who are happy that people are dying, which seems
Mm,
crazy,
mm.
but it's true. And it and it's what do you call that? It it is logically in, it's like hard to comprehend, but it's
Like a
also this
dissonance, maybe like a dissonance or
dissonance.
something?
Yeah,
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 yeah. There's so much cognitive dissonance around the fact that people are happy that other people are dying.
I
It's
mean, it's what you're saying is profound, and I think once again very interesting because oftentimes the lyric writing is kind of perceived by many as this kind of real, how do I say, like an interpersonal exploration, right? Like I
mm,
feel like even my little 9-year-old Nico was saying that, Daddy, I think every song is like a love song, like when he was listening to the radio, he's like, that's another love song. That's another love song. And it's like, yeah, he's right, but there's also, I think for the individuals or for the writing and the lyric writing that I think transcends and kind of moves into these other worlds that you're bringing up, whether it's engaging with history, engaging with personal histories, engaging with sort of societal commentary, you know deconstructing these kind of cults of personality and why oppression happens. That's when we kind of, I think, start moving into these discussions that you know we call it literature, call it whatever you want to call it, but just a greater scope, right? I mean, I think that's part of the reason why the commentary around Dylan's recognition um, was so interesting, because people who know the work would say, like, he's really commenting on these these kinds of issues, whether he's championing the working class or examining how individuals do create inhumanity to others or whatever he's doing this on a really grand scale. And he's not the first songwriter actually that, or he's the second songwriter. I think the other, I think it was 1913, don't quote me on that, but the Indian poet and singer Rabindranath Tagore, who's a really fascinating writer, was also recognized by the Nobel Society. So um, I think his work also has that kind of like global scope. Um, so, and yours really does too. Like I'm looking at the lyrics, Sima, and I'm looking at Petunia off "Not God." Is the first line is "Bully on the big mountain thinks he's got the high ground," and
mm,
then of course like um, "Not God" to me is a total. I don't know if listeners know that one, but it's a song that really um, I think examines kind of leader worshiping and cult of personalities, and
mm,
like and tries to kind of pop a hole in that
yeah.
in
But
an
but but that one too, like Not God,
yeah,
it's kind of, you know, like I'm sort of, I kind of write the first verse like starts inside of the person of the cult leader.
right,
Like it's me talking about, okay, you're ripping out a page, you're writing down your name, you're filling up this ego, you're pumping yourself up. Like it's all about that. It's not necessarily like the whole song is me. You know, it's I think that's something that I'm just really interested in, is like
Mhm.
how do these characters come to be? And
Right.
it's not only about criticizing the
Correct.
characters, even though that tends to be sometimes, I think often it ends up being like the chorus is like, I feel like I like write in my verses often like about the character, and
Hmm.
then the chorus is like what I actually want to say to this character.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. Like I've created this world where you're in it. Let me just bring in me here
Yeah,
to like
yeah.
yeah, like get involved in the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. So you brought this up before, and it is a question of mine, so I want to ask you kind of directly about it too. Like I was going to ask like how Armenian in a way, or is your artistry, your lyric writing? And you kind of brought it up in a sense that I think that, and I do, and I don't have too much scholarship on this, but I think Armenians are kind of like like they're kind of distrustful of these kinds of passing leaders, and because of our experiences, our political history, our
Yeah.
and the trauma that it's kind of wrought with, and this I think fierce kind of resilience for autonomy and independence in the Armenian spirit. It's like we have this like reaction sometimes to these cult of personality leaders, and to me that
Yeah.
sounds
Hot
like
take: Armenians struggle with leadership.
yeah. It's all right. So I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on Sima's, like, are there other ways in which your lyrics are Armenian, or you could talk about that way, or just something that we could talk about for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, I mean, one of the things that I think about in terms of it being Armenian, and I feel like this is something that I think about a lot because how I've evolved my feelings and my thoughts about what being Armenian is and how
Mhm.
to celebrate it and how to find joy in it. But I think also there's this big glaring truth that part of being Armenian is contending with with grief, right? Like so many of us are brought into consciousness as Armenians with a story of grief. And I remember this clear as a crystal ball. When I first arrived to Armenia, 14 years ago or something like that, 13 or 14 years ago. And I was hanging out on Sadian, and I was talking to someone. I don't even know this person very closely, but they were sort of like, "Why are you in Armenia? Like, what do you know?" And I was sort of telling them about my family history, and we do food, but I was like, it's been a big part of my life is talking about genocide and how my family came from it, and I have my grandmother's diary, my great grandmother's diary from it.
Wow.
And I remember this Armenian guy explained to me in a very, very interesting, a little mansplainy, but also like, this will never, he was like, it's so sad that all you know about being Armenian is the darkest moment of Armenian history. And I remember being sort of taken aback by it, and feeling really shook by that. And I think that is true in some ways. But I also think that, you know, part of there's so much Armenian music and literature that is about like the art of grief and how do you process grief through art so that you can like go on living a beautiful life. And I think that's actually, I find a lot of beauty and solace in that now because I think that is actually um like one of the most important skills is, and something that people all around the world have to do, is how do you live with so much tragedy around and still find beauty and joy. I mean, I've been thinking about this pretty much nonstop for the past year, thinking about how do Palestinians like even find a moment or a way to smile while they're experiencing genocide, like how do they do that? And but I think that it's true that people grief is grief and the tragedy of what's happening to Palestinian people, what happened to Armenian people, it's like words can't capture it, right? Like, or at least sentences can't capture it. But because it's nonsense, because it's cognitive dissonance that something so horrible could be happening to people. But what's amazing is that artists, I even think about like Gorky and how he processed so much of his grief through like sometimes very simple portraiture of just the people that he was thinking about.
Mhm.
And I think that that is like, that's where I find lyricism, is that it dances in between like abstract wordplay and and you know really clarifying something that you're feeling. And so I guess that like I think about grief and how that has um, influenced like my own identity. Because obviously like I haven't personally experienced genocide in my life. I've like lived a very wonderful, rich and privileged life. But nevertheless, these stories of grief are a part of my understanding of like how where I am in the world, and they are a part of my people. Like when so I that's like the sadder side of how it I think connects to being Armenian.
Mhm.
I think beyond that, Armenians like I feel like when I got to Armenia 13 years ago, my feeling was that like everyone was living right on like the edge of existence. And it sort of felt, I don't know, I've talked with a lot of friends who've like lived in Armenia over the years, and there's kind of like this intoxicating like uh yeah, it's like an intoxicating ride that you're on when you get to Armenia, right? But of course, you encounter people. I have so many friends who live their whole lives in Armenia, and they're a little seasick from being on that ride their whole life. And it's exhausting to have to, exist. And it's obviously, I arrived to Armenia and instantly romanticized it and instantly
Mhm.
fell in love
Yeah.
with the chaos of it all. I found it to be beautifully chaotic. Um, but in my 12 years since then, I've come to, appreciate Armenia for all of like the beauty and kind of the way that I feel like there's like a freedom there that is, I don't know, I find it feels just like a huge space of possibility for me. But I
Mhm.
also see all of the pain and the turmoil and the way that it really hurts, Armenia still hurts Armenians. And that I guess that connects back to that like feeling of like grief and joy being hand in hand. And
Mhm.
like part of our struggle as humans is how do we walk around all day, every day for our whole lives holding these two huge genres of emotion in our hands, in our hearts.
Yeah, a lot of what you're saying resonates, I think, to individuals, or like myself, to somebody who has that history tied to Armenian, you know, grief or trauma, living in the diaspora. There's this, and you really nailed it. This kind of romanticizing of what we think. That tension is fascinating to me. Like what, knowing some poets in Armenia, their the way they're, musicians and what their lives are like versus what the diasporans' perceptions of Armenia are like versus like, there are all these conversations, and they're certainly tied together by certain, threads. But to me, that examination is fascinating, and it's interesting that it exists in you're bringing it up as part of like how you make meaning of the world and how it surfaces in your art, and how it's kind of an influence. And maybe if you could, speaking of influences, that was the other question too, unless you want to say something else about that a little more. You were
Well,
about to.
you just said something that reminded me of another so I'm from two people of grief art,
Yeah, yeah,
Armenians, and my other half is Irish, and
yeah. There you go.
I'm about to go to Ireland in a couple days. And I'm really excited. It's my first time going to Ireland with my
Oh,
family.
cool.
And on my dad's side, I grew up playing Irish music and like learning. And I actually think that Irish music is ultimately a big influence on my. It was an early influence on my songwriting. And I was getting ready for this talk. I was reading through some Tumanian poems, and
Mhm.
I was finding myself like, for me, it's like reading poetry on the page doesn't do a lot for me. But
Hmm.
I was reading Tumanian and I was singing them all with like an Irish melody underneath it, and it really works. It really works. There's something about like that,
Yeah.
just sort of like that repetitive turn of phrase, and like the way that Irish music like kind of, I don't know, I just think that music really helps propel you through this journey of words. And
Mm.
um, I think now, this popped into my head that maybe I should record a whole album of Tumanian poems with Irish melodies underneath them. I don't
That's
know. That might
beautiful.
be a
That's
bad idea,
fascinating. So
but
interesting. A lot of them might be in like a 3/4 time, maybe.
yeah.
With the Irish, kind of. I think there's a big connection between Irish experiences and Armenian experiences. I was talking to some other friends about that, and I grew up playing in a band with, two Irish, men, just great friends. And I didn't know it then, but I think as I understood histories more, and I think we were kind of drawn together by a kind of, I don't know, like maybe a certain kind of
Oh,
way in which.
we're made for each other.
Yeah,
The Irish and the Armenians were made for
yeah,
each other. That's for
yeah.
sure.
So if you we're going to I want to switch gears, and if it's okay, and maybe get into the I think there's a video. Hofstep, do you have the Sima's video like sort of queued up? And then Sima, can you introduce the video a little bit? Tell us what song, and then and maybe a little bit about the content of the lyrics as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
That's great. This song is called Your Bones, and it's from my new record, High Roller, that's coming out August 30th. And this song I wrote, um, it's about trying to be there, like just trying to be with the person that is going through a really hard thing. And I think I've thought for a long, I've been I've been working really hard at when someone in my life who's important to me is battling depression or just processing something that's really hard, not trying to fix them and not trying to give them solutions, but actually just trying to give them love and support and stand next to them and let them be the center of the universe instead of trying to like fix them in the context of my own universe.
Hmm.
So that's what this song is about.
Thank you.
And I made a really beautiful video with my friend Jake. We shot it all on Kodak film, and it was a really special process. So I hope you guys
Let's
enjoy
check it out. Yeah.
There we go. There we go. Mm-hmm. There's something in your eyes today. You're simply not the same. I wanna be a catalyst that makes it all okay. You're trying to write a letter, the rhythms of your breath. We start to say, but now we've taught this elephant to death. 'Cause your bones are your own. Your bones are your own. Your bones are your own. You went on the ocean on a solitary. I want a lifeboat but it only goes. You're blind with salty water, desperate. Soon you'll find an eye, a place I'll never see. Your bones are your own. Your bones are your own. I don't need to be your hero, just to be your friend, just to speak your language, just to be the respect. I try to read your needs like you're a novel in turmoil, like you are the main character, and I am just the foil. 'Cause your bones are your own, 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 your bones are your own.
Yeah.
Hey, I think there may have been some audio gating kind of things happening with the with the take, but the
Yeah.
lyrics were there and the shots were gorgeous.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe we can put the link there for individuals to check out
Yeah.
in the chat, Hofstep on their own. But yeah, just in short, you know, so many. It feels such like a an act of compassion, that song, to me. I was like writing little notes down while, you know, and I've heard the lyrics before, and I heard it, and it's from the new album, right? The High Roller album you mentioned, which is
Yeah.
coming out on August 30th for individuals who are listening live or later. And you know, for me, when I first heard it, um, I just thought it was also kind of weirdly about parenting, maybe. I don't know. It kind of came up for me that way. Um, this notion of like, I try to read your needs like you're a novel in turmoil, like you're the main character and I'm just a foil. And I just thought this kind of like championing others. I don't know. It's just I want to bring the lifeboat, but it only holds you back. I mean, there's a lot of symbolism here. I don't know if you want to talk about that or if it was if parenting was in your mind for that, but I know you mentioned something else. But anyway, speak a little bit more about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, now I sing that song and I can barely hold it together because
Yeah.
you know, every time I think about my kid, I'm like, but but yeah, I mean, obviously, I think one of like this song and a lot of songs that I write, I am like really fascinated by the romanticism of friendship. I
Mm.
think that
Awesome.
friendships are so like beautiful and should be cherished in the same way that like romantic partners are. Um, I find so much musical inspiration in thinking about friends that I had as children, friends that I've had at different eras in my life. Right now, watching friends try to move through life and try to process different experiences. I just like I love writing about my friends. And all of the love that I like receive from them and the love that I try to give to them. That's like any love songs that I write. I occasionally write a love song. I've been lucky enough to experience great romantic love and partnership in my life, and I have a beautiful husband. And I've written a couple love songs that are like in that world. But I write a lot of, I feel like, friendship love songs. Uh, there's a song on the new Finom record that came out a couple months ago called As You Are, that's like really just a love song for my childhood best friend, who I feel like was the whole reason why I feel like she just was the perfect person to like take an imagination and explode it into a whole universe of like joy and experience. So I write a lot about friendship. I find a lot of inspiration there. And, but yeah, I also feel, I mean, yeah, now I have a huge, I'm actually planning, I'm trying to figure out going on a retreat sometime in the next couple months because I feel up to my eyeballs in emotion that I want to turn into song. I've been a parent now for 18 months and it's been pretty hard to like connect with my internal monologue. I'm sure many parents can connect with that. I spend so much of my day just going, wow, isn't she amazing? Oh, she's doing that. Okay, what do you need? I need to eat. You need to eat, so it's pretty hard to like find, but I do like find moments to like trying to write down little experiences from this past year and a half that I think I want to, channel into songwriting. But yeah, Your Bones, come to think of it, I feel like there's part of that song there's a poem. I know it from, I think it's a Sweet Honey in the Rock song, but it's called On Children. And it's a song that I sang. I grew up singing in a choir, in the Chicago Children's Choir. And we used to sing this song like a cappella, and and I just think it's like some of the most poignant lyrics that I've ever encountered in my life. And I sing it all the time and I think about it. So I'm just gonna like sing it to you right now just so you can
Do
hear
it.
it.
Yeah, do it.
It goes, I was always an alto, so I might just be singing the alto part, but you'll get the idea. Mm. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and the daughters of life, longing for themselves. They come through you, but they are not for you. And though they are with you, they belong not to you. You can give them your love, but not your thoughts. They have their own thoughts. They have their own thoughts. You can house their bodies, but not their souls. For the souls dwell in a place of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You can strive to be like them, but you cannot make them just like you. Strive to be like them, but you cannot make them just like you. That's it.
Oh, wow. It's like a
But
little
that's one,
hymn, a little prayer or something. Yeah.
totally a little prayer on,
Hmm.
yeah. Oh God, already choking me up. Every time I think about, um, yeah, just like the beauty of like seeing someone that you love and cherish so much and giving them the space to do their own thing. Oh, it's like the most beautiful thing in the world. Makes me cry.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Sima. This has been a great kind of
Thank
little window into the conversation, and you're so generous with your thinking. I wanted to switch over for the last 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes maximum, just for some questions from the group, and then Hovsep will say just a few sort of closing words for our session. But it's been really interesting for me as a songwriter and a poet to kind of hear your reflections.
Yeah.
So if you
Thank
haven't
you,
put some,
Alan. I
yeah,
really appreciate you having me. I'm
it is such a pleasure, and you're such a dear,
such an
amazing
admirer of
artist.
you. So
We have such a good, I don't know, I have a lot of deep connection to what you're making out there in the world, Sima. Keep it up. I'm just going to look at some questions here, and if you haven't put a question on the chat, please do. There's one from Alan Whitehorn, and Alan mentions, maybe you could talk about this for a minute or two. In ancient times, poetry began as an oral tradition. Um, I talk about this with my students too, as a way to kind of, the rhymes as a way to kind of hear and memorize certain themes and ideas and stories. So poetry began as this kind of oral tradition. And I think Alan is asking, do you see songwriting as like kind of honoring that tradition, going back to that tradition? He didn't say honoring, I said honoring, but he said going back to that tradition.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways, my guess is that they were one and the same. And then there was sort of this split that happened. And, through whatever forces, it felt like, these are different genres of human expression. But I've always thought of them as like, I guess, deeply connected down at the roots. Like it's about their ways for the human voice to sound out. And I think, we know for so many reasons whether it was necessary for information, but I also think that humans sounding out their voice is one of the ways that we like calm and regulate our bodies. And is one of the ways that we like produce feelings of community and connection and feeling like we're not alone in this big scary universe, is that we sing together, or we and I love the idea of, everyone has, I feel like everyone's had that experience of like, I want to use my voice right now, or I want to hear other voices, but I don't want to have a conversation. I don't want to have a rapport with someone. I just want to use my voice with other people around. And I think that poetry and singing, music both give us that opportunity to do one of the most human things, which is to use our voice and to convey something through our human voices. So, yeah, I think that ancient times, I think it's ancient times, and I think it's true because it's like a fact of our species.
So lovely. It's like it's part of the human condition. It sounds like you're saying, right? That urge to use the voice. Albert Kapikian here says, interesting question. Words can't, if as you say, words can't capture certain experiences. Can we say there is something called lyric knowledge? And if so, how would you define like lyric knowledge as opposed to, I guess, as opposed to other kinds of knowledge?
Yeah.
Cool question.
It is a cool question, and it makes me think about I've been revisiting a lot of Shel Silverstein and Dr. Seuss recently.
Well, I could imagine why.
Yeah. But because not only because I have a kid, but because I think Shel Silverstein in particular is like a huge early influence for me.
Cool.
I loved those poems when I was a kid. I devoured them and I still love them. Um, and I think that I think lyric knowledge, I don't know if this is what you were referring to, but what I think about when I hear that, lyric knowledge, I think about the fact that we can say things that don't necessarily mean what they're supposed to, or we can say words that are not really in the lexicon or not in a dictionary, but in the right context, we know what they mean. And that is because of human experience and because of human connection. And I love that. I love that there's all these like Dr. Seuss books that have tons of nonsense words and nonsense characters and even nonsense turns of phrase. Um, but but we can still decipher kind of what he's trying to convey, which is something imagined. Like through his words, we can access Dr. Seuss's imagination. That's amazing if you think about it. Like, I guess pictures, there's pictures with it too, but I think there's, I have that experience all the time of listening to someone's lyrics and I'm like, God, that makes no sense. And sometimes I'm frustrated by it, like I will admit sometimes I think songwriting lyrics or poetry is like infuriatingly vague, and
Mm,
and sometimes I feel like it like fights connection. Like it's like
mm,
I don't want anyone to connect to this. I want them to work really, really hard to have to connect to it.
mm.
Um, but then sometimes after I like fight it through with something, I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Sometimes I'm like, I just think that's not good, or it's, not to my taste, or um, but I think that uh yeah, I think what's cool is that sometimes we can just throw a bunch of words on the page and I'm like, well, it came out of my brain, so it made sense somewhere in some. And then sometimes people are like, yeah, yeah, actually, that makes sense to me too. I can't say why. I don't know why, but it's also like it hits on something that I've never really been able to explain to people, but that I feel. I think that's cool.
Well, that's a big one. The idea of feeling and capturing. To me, I'm hearing you say, and I have this conversation with other songwriter friends of mine, where that the urge to dive into the lyrical imagination and shape something is not necessarily to be evasive, although it can feel that way, but it's actually quite the opposite. It's trying to articulate an experience more specifically, more, it's trying to honor the complexity of the experience.
Mm.
And that sometimes that complexity can be quite abstract, and it could involve some weird symbolic image that is not always easy to access, but somehow is truer than than the articulation of the experience in a kind of linear way, because we don't experience things linearly as a human being. Our human experience is, it's like there are all these different things kind of coming at us. So, I'm going back to this thing that you said so beautifully at the TED. Maybe this is a good place to end, but at the TEDx Yerevan in 2012, Sima, you said music is about letting go and finding a space inside all of us for the polyphony and the harmony and the complexity and the simplicity and the possibility of peace to exist. And I just thought that was so beautiful, and how, you know, those kind of binaries all exist together in music making and lyric writing at the heart of what we do and the heart of art, I think.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you. I don't know if we have time. Maybe we have time for one more question.
But
Yeah, the way you characterize being Armenian as focusing on the darkest parts of history was so astute and close to home. How do you think music and writing can both honor the past while also moving forward and
yeah.
redressing the Armenian narrative as something more than grief?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think thanks for quoting that. I actually forgot that I said that at TEDx 12 years ago, but I still believe it very strongly, which is that um, I've been in so many rooms in my life where I've either not been able to communicate with people because there's a language barrier. I've been in rooms with people who are the descendants of the people that killed my people. I don't know if I would do that today, but I traveled solo through Turkey 10, 12 years ago, and sat down at rooms with Turks and talked with them, and um and had to hold all of this feeling inside of like, all right, well, you're a human and I'm a human, and our ancestors had these, you know experiencing and conflicting things, these experiences together, but that colors this interaction that we're having here, but ultimately it doesn't determine how this interaction between us humans living and breathing are going to play out. And I think that experience and how music can sort of help, like, it allows for people who wouldn't otherwise be able to find a way to understand each other to find a way to understand each other. And I think that's really really wonderful and really important. You know, I try to be careful about not overplaying how, you know, I don't think that cultural diplomacy is the only way. I don't think that us sitting around in a circle and singing a song together is going to make peace. But what I do think is that music is such an important and core way for humans to connect with each other and be able to connect with each other without having to talk about other things, you know, because sometimes conversation, as I said before, conversation can be a hard place to start. Like, not everyone is great at conversations. Sometimes very hard conversations need to be had between people, but you have to find a way to establish humanity first. And I think that art is such a useful vehicle for that. And music in particular is like, yeah, I mean, just instantly you feel like, all right, I believe it. I believe that you're a human being. I hear your voice. I hear you singing. That's beautiful. That conveys emotion. That speaks to me and tells me that you have, you know, that you come from somewhere, that you come from a whole life. I always think about this is such a weird divot away to or pivot for like the end of this conversation. But I always think about if I was ever being physically attacked, I would just sing at them. That's like my thing that I would do. I'm like, all right, if someone was ever like really trying to hurt me, I would just like open my voice and sing at them and see what the hell happened.
Wow.
And I, you know, I'm not naive, but I think that there's a lot that that can come of people, you know, making music together, sharing voices. And I think for Armenians are so bursting with creativity and feeling and experience. And, you know, I think if we can, Armenians are also really hard on each other. I mean, look at me. I'm already like, it's so easy to talk shit about Armenians with other Armenians. But I think that something I always hope is that Armenians will give each other more space to like creatively figure out new ways to be with each other in the world and like give each other the benefit of the doubt more often. We've had like a hard run of it, but we are a good and wonderful and creative people. And if we can just like crack open our stone cold hearts sometimes, because we've had to harden up in a lot of ways, but I feel like there's so much like love and expression in there if we can just help coax each other into like a more healthy and sharing way to be Armenian, way to be in the world.
Sima, incredibly stimulating discussion on lyrics, the lyrical imagination, and more. We're incredibly thankful for your time, so generous. We're thankful for everybody that came out for the chat. Thank you to the International Armenian Literary Alliance for making space for this event. And I just, want to say that, this conversation really is a kind of a beginning for individuals to think about their own ways in which they're kind of, making meaning of the world through their art, through others' arts. And hopefully we'll continue this. Thank you, everybody. Go catch Sima, go catch Sima on tour.
Woo! See you on tour. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Hofsep and Yala. Thank you.